Day 1, Hour 0. The lander shuddered as its retros fired, scattering silver dust across the basalt flats of Persimmon Crater. Dr. Tamsin Rowe held her breath until the tremor passed, then snapped her restraints open and pulled herself toward the lock. One glance through the viewport confirmed what orbital scans had promised. An abandoned moon. Airless, untouched, perfect. No plants, no microbes, no inscrutable life to complicate her work. Just jagged horizons and searing sun, ready to be rewritten. Behind her, Idris Cole swore softly while unbuckling 2 crates of equipment. You ever get used to arriving alone on a dead rock? Tamsin smiled without turning. I don't think I'd do this if it ever felt routine. He carried the crates outside, magnetic boots clicking. Tamsin followed, exosuit heads-up display glowing with data. Solar radiation, vacuum, temperature, all lethal. Yet she felt a biologist's exhilaration, an anticipatory hum she always heard when about to release living things where none had ever lived before. They had 72 hours to grow a forest, not a figurative one, nothing leafy or tranquil. This was to be a barrage wood, a living artillery platform. She named the species Osteomyces ballista in her application to the Protectorate Science Corps, a fungal tower that self-assembles magnetic rails through iron chelation, grows spore pods packed with nickel slugs, and contracts piezoelectric muscle fibers to hurl those pods at hypersonic speed. In preliminary chambers on Mars, the tallest tower had pierced a tungsten wall from 2 kilometers. Now they would scale the demonstration up. 100 hectares seeded, towers spaced at 50-meter intervals, each capable of firing 30 pods per day, auto-targeting through echolocating Scifi. Selene Beta was unclaimed, save for rumors that the Stonewell Harcourt Combine wanted to occupy it for iridium. The Protectorate needed a deterrent strong enough that no one would land troops. A commander could always launch missiles, but missiles went stale and cost money. A forest that fed on regolith and sunlight and remade itself after each volley was cheaper. And, the Directorate quietly hoped, terrifying. What you're creating is a war crime that photosynthesizes, her older sister had told her. But Tamsin wasn't so sure the moral calculus was that simple. A weapon that fired only if someone invaded was, in her view, a warding glyph, an immune response. And like any immune system, it required exquisitely precise engineering. She knelt and opened the first crate. Inside slept a dozen vacuum-sealed rhizopods, swollen knots of ivory tissue streaked with glittering iron. They looked inert, but their cells were racing, plasmids continually recoding the genome for speed. Let's wake them up, she muttered. Idris set 2 tripod beacons on the perimeter and toggled them to broadcast ultrasonic pings. That was the cue. Each tower would orient toward the nearest beacon pair, interpreting the signal as a virtual north. The railgun conduits inside the mature stalks would slot themselves along that axis, ensuring collimated fire. Ground temp's good, Idris reported. -80, climbing fast with sunrise. No unexpected seismic. Then we start. Tamsin brushed lunar dust aside, exposing raw basalt. She placed a rhizopod, sliced its membrane, and watched filaments writhe out like translucent worms seeking purchase. Nutrient solution followed, mostly chelated metals, magnesium, engineered bacteria that could fix regolith into fodder. The filaments latched onto the dust, dissolved particles with acid, and burrowed. They repeated the process, setting pods in a rough grid. By the time 19 were seeded, tiny sighs touched her suit's contact mics. Moisture boiling as metabolic heat bloomed. She checked the clock. 45 minutes since touchdown. Already the moon was less empty. Day 1, Hour 6. When they returned to the lander for rations, the flat plane behind them no longer looked flat. Hillocks had puckered around each pod. Some bulged almost a meter high. Tendrils of pale mycelium, stronger than Kevlar yet flexible as silk, laced the ground between pods, forming an invisible communication web. Idris whistled. Tell me you're not secretly a time traveler. Tamsin sipped electrolyte broth. Fast growth is just good editing. Remember the plankton terraforming Europa? Same promoters, different payload. They reviewed sensor feeds. Subsurface imagery showed vertical scaffolds knitting inside each bulge, ringed with rings of magnetite plates. The towers would emerge by dawn tomorrow, 90 meters tall, hollow cores charged like capacitors. Until then, the structures drank minerals, excreted waste gases into vacuum, and followed the script Tamsin had stitched into them. Yet a nagging worry resurfaced: the virulence module. To mature within 72 hours, O ballista required a runaway replicative loop, one typically reserved for lethal pathogens. She had inserted a built-in clock gene. After 96 hours, methyl switches would shut the loop down. But biology obeyed probability, not promises. Cascades glitched. She forced the thought away. The directorate had demanded speed. Speed accepted no half measures. Day 1, hour 13. Night fell again, a version of night unique to airless worlds. Black vacuum swallowing the gray plain while the sun crept behind the horizon. The towers chose this lull to puncture the surface. Tamsin woke to ground quakes rattling the bunk. She grabbed her helmet, sprinted outside, and gasped. Stalks as wide as water tanks had erupted across the grid, glowing faintly blue as Cherenkov-like sparks crackled along their rails. The filaments had siphoned electrons from piezo crystals and were bleeding charge into the dry atmosphere, creating corona halos around each tower top, a forest of ghost lamps. Height 32 meters and climbing, Idris murmured over comms. Awe softened his usual sardonic tone. She walked between two stalks. Close up, the bark was ribbed metal organic ceramic, warm under her gloved palm. Ports along the trunk opened and shut, venting steam laced with spores too young to weaponize. It occurred to her that she stood amid organisms heavier than most buildings, organisms her laptop could command. She felt like a fraud and a god simultaneously. From the south ridge, a beacon flashed. The recon drone had spotted an incoming ship. Not Stonewall Harcourt, not Protectorate. Transponder silent. ETA 48 hours. If they're smugglers, they'll bail after one look, Idris said. Tamsin thought otherwise. People rarely approached empty moons without designs. Maybe they'd heard rumors of a demonstration and wanted to sabotage it. Maybe a corporate scout team rushed here to plant a flag before her towers matured. She pinged Central Dispatch for clarification, but the long-range antenna was still assembling. Until it locked, they were alone. Day 2, hour 5. The towers reached full height at dawn, 94 meters average. Bracts unfurled near each crown, revealing glossy pods the size of refrigerators. The pods nestled against spiraled electromagnetic rails extruded from internal vacuoles. A low hum filled the plane, a chord below hearing, barely sensed through suit joints. The forest was arming itself. Idris placed seismic detectors around the perimeter. Once they start firing, we need spread metrics or Directorate will scream. He needn't have worried. The Scifi cluster AI inside every tower integrated with the beacons, deriving topography, even sampling Idris's footsteps to index humans as non-targets. Tamsin had coded the recognition suite herself, forcing the fungus to ignore shapes under 2 meters unless heat signatures match furnace exhaust, a crude friend-foe filter. Spore temperature threshold is high, she reminded him. They only fire if an object's hull runs above -10 Celsius. That weeds out stray rocks. What about someone walking in a heated suit? We'll keep suits chilled. Welcome to low-grade hypothermia for science. He rolled his eyes. Day 2, hour 12. The forest rehearsed. Without launching pods, the towers contracted muscular bands around their rails. Each contraction produced a sonic thump that rattled Tamsin's ribcage. Dust fountain meters high. Capacitors flashed, vented, recharged. The organisms were learning their limbs. The unidentified vessel decelerated into orbit, still silent. Scans showed a freighter hull with improvised point defense turrets. Not enough guns for full-scale assault, but perhaps enough to strafe a science outpost before official navies intervened. Tamsin recorded a polite hail on every public frequency. Warning, orbital exclusion zone, experimental weapons test. Enter at own peril. She doubted it would matter. She pictured the waiver she'd signed. I acknowledge that Osteomyces ballista may engage targets autonomously if specific environmental thresholds are triggered. Risk to personnel, moderate, risk to property, extreme. She hadn't understood how heavy that sentence would feel when strangers approached, unknowing. Day 2, hour 21. They unfolded a portable habitat at the crater rim, safer than the cramped lander nestled inside the grid. Though tired, Tamsin couldn't sleep. She pulled on a thermal layer, exited the habitat, and climbed a ridge. Below, the towers whispered, exchanging bioelectric pulses through buried cables of root and copper. The plain looked like a nightmarish orchard, trunks luminescing, corona sparks dripping like electric dew. Her mind drifted to childhood. She'd once grown mushrooms in jars, poked toothpicks through the lids so they'd have air. She'd felt responsible when green mold contaminated one jar and killed the rest. Now she cultivated a strain that could reduce starships to slag, and the stakes dwarfed guilt. An alert pulsed on her wrist. Temperature spike inside Tower C07. She accessed its feed. Internal mycelium reported abnormal enzyme acceleration, hundreds of standard deviations above baseline. Translation: a runaway loop. She froze. If virulence cascaded, Tower C07 could produce spores nonstop, ignoring the 96-hour failsafe, maybe even ignoring friend-foe tags. Worse, fungal plasmids traded like gossip. One glitch could travel routeways in minutes. She sprinted downslope. Idris jogged from the habitat to meet her. Saw the spike. What's up? C07's replication governor is blowing. Need to excise before it propagates. How? Burn it. His eyebrows rose inside the helmet crown light. With what? Napalm? Teslamite charges. Overload their own rails. Detonate from inside. They rigged a backpack capacitor with coax cables. Idris volunteered to climb. Tamsin argued. He shrugged off protest. I'm the one with demolition certs. Tamsin watched him scale metal bark studded with cruciform nodes. At 20 meters, he wedged the charge inside a cooling vent. Ready, he said, voice calm. She retreated to safe distance, keyed the detonator. A white flare erupted, then a roar like tearing planets. Tower C07 sheared at mid-trunk, geysering molten ceramic. Shards rained across the plain. The remaining towers pulsed red internally, interpreting vibration as threat, but Tamsin pushed a manual override through the beacon network, broadcasting hold. The red faded. Silence returned, punctuated by Idris's labored breathing. He had made it down unscathed. Day 3, hour 2. 21 towers remained, stable. But Tamsin couldn't ignore her error. Her design nearly spiraled beyond control before the first engagement. She double-checked every methyl lock, every kill switch parameter, patching code wirelessly into Scifi memory. The forest accepted updates with unsettling ease, as if it understood contrition. Meanwhile, the freighter descended. It came in low over the eastern ridge, using the crater wall to mask approach from orbit. Hull plates radiated at -5°C, just under Tamsin's threshold. Clever. Whoever captained the ship had scanned for emission tripwires, but the landing thrusters blew out hot plumes, spiking to +200 in seconds. Dozens of sensors lit green. Towers pivoted. Idris cursed. Should we abort? Civilians on board, maybe? Tamsin zoomed optics. Logos along the hull. SHC. Stonewell Harcourt, after all. She saw rail turrets swiveling down. Not civilians, she said. Blossoms opened across the plain, pods irising back to expose nickel slugs. The first volley cracked like simultaneous thunderclaps. Hypersonic spores streaked white, friction-burning fragments of air frost they dragged from internal reservoirs. In under a second, the freighter's starboard fins shredded. 2 more salvos ripped into the engine cluster, cleaving thruster bells. A bloom of crystalline vapor glittered, spilled fuel freezing mid-spray. The freighter tried to climb. Rail turrets answered with blue beams, but they scattered wide. The pilot flew blind through debris. Another volley caved the hull amidships, exposing pressurized decks. Something flashed inside. Maybe ammunition, maybe life support. The ship rolled, venting shards, and smashed into Perseverance Ridge 4 kilometers away, scattering wreckage down the slope. Tamsin's heart hammered. End of engagement. 34 seconds. She exhaled a trembling breath. Celebration felt obscene. She whispered, "Cease fire," and the towers obeyed, pods snapping shut. The sky above glittered with dust and ice. No explosions, no flames, just the quiet of vacuum and a drifting pall of debris, reflecting sunlight like tinsel. Day 3, Hour 4. Tamsin and Idris trekked to the crash site, twisted girders poked from drifts of dust. Bodies in vacuum-hardened suits lay motionless. One turret still glowed, its muzzle melted. No survivors signaled. Idris salvaged flight recorders. Tamsin retrieved fragments for microbial assay. Their boots crunched over shards brittle as candy glass. Back at camp, Directorate Comms finally linked. Admiral Jung appeared as a hologram, taking in the crater periphery scanned by external cams. "We see the wreck," she said. "Status?" "Forest intact," Tamsin replied. "Threat neutralized. One tower down preemptively due to instability." Jung nodded. "Acceptable. Retrieve samples, then stand by for garrison arrival." The transmission ended. Idris looked at her. "That's it? No commendation, no reprimand." "That's bureaucracy." She managed a wan smile. "We built a line of defense that works too well," Idris muttered. Day 3, Hour 7. They sat on a ridge overlooking the forest. Towers glittered, sunrise painting them fire orange. Pods pulsed with slow metabolism, reloading nickel from dissolved regolith. Within a day, they'd be at full ammunition again. Within a week, they'd spawn daughter towers at grid edges, expanding the perimeter. Unless shut down, the artillery would encircle half the hemisphere within a month. Tamsin opened her datapad. A shutdown command could be issued anytime, broadcast as a biochemical signature. But the Directorate hadn't asked for deactivation. They intended to keep the moon armed, a biological fortress no enemy fleet would dare approach. Idris sipped recycled coffee, steam ghosting in the habitat. "You okay?" She considered lying. Instead, she said, "When I was 9, I named a bonsai Wendell and cried when it died. Now I've built something that kills starships. You also saved any settlers who come here from being bombed by corporations." That's the justifying story. The darker story is I proved out a blueprint. Someone will copy it with half the safeguards. Next time, the towers might not wait for thrust or heat. They'll flatten anything breathing. He looked at the distant stalks. "Can you add more safeties?" "Maybe, but there's always a cleverer virus." They fell silent, listening to the windless hush, a hush broken only by soft static clicks, the sound of towers talking underground, communication pulses, moisture management, calculations for sun angle. It sounded almost like rainfall. Day 3, Hour 12. They began packing. Directorate ships would arrive in 2 hours with engineers, Marines, politicians wanting photo ops. Tamsin archived terabytes of growth data. Her eyes lingered on one file, the methyl clock patch. She added a secondary trigger, keyed to her own voice print, and the phrase, "let the forest sleep." If spoken within broadcast range, towers would halt replication, dissolve their rails into inert glass, and freeze spores into vitrified kernels. A kill word tucked inside the nursery rhyme of her celestial children. She didn't tell Idris or the Directorate. As she sealed the crate, a shadow crossed her visor. A tower's pod swiveling, tracking the sun, just a sunflower warhead greeting day. Beautiful, she thought, and monstrous, and hers. Departure. Hour 0. The lander lifted, engines lighting the plane. Through the porthole, the artillery forest receded, row upon row of living cannon stretching beyond the crater rim, each tower casting a long eclipse on the dust. She watched until the stalks were slender quills, then silver spores of reflection, then nothing against the gray sphere. In the quiet cabin, Idris dozed. Tamsin whispered the kill phrase, testing it in her mouth. No transmitter active, no command sent, merely words adrift in human breath. Someday, she promised the moon below, if the forest forgets why it was made, I will remind it to sleep. Until then, let the world reckon with what grows in darkness, quick as thought, sure as mycelium, patient as regret.